Hey, folks, it is April the 7th, and today we're going to continue on with our World Geography Unit 1 notes. And keep in mind that a copy of this is in the Google Classroom, so you can keep along with that. We're going to, because there's going to be a 10th grade EOC tomorrow, we won't be able to lecture because it'll be too loud and disruptive for them. So make sure you do your homework. And also study your notes because next Tuesday we're going to have a quiz over what we've covered from these geography notes. So wherever we stop on Friday, that's going to be the cutoff point. So make sure you did. All right, so last time we were talking about mental maps, and this is simply a play on memory. What's funny about mental maps, you might remember we were talking about the more you know about something, the more deep. Jaden, here, bud. Oh, yeah. And close the Chromebook, would you?
Are you here to
You can keep up. Okay, fine. Fine.
I wonder who warned you about that.
I ignore you a lot of times.
So they did need it. Man, why didn't they tell me? Oh well. Hey, oh, don't worry about it. So another thing too, what's funny is like, maps are different before they were standardized. They were different. Like ancient maps from places like Indonesia, their maps were actually first-person perspective. So it would be like they would, instead of writing a map like you're from outer space looking down, like European maps, they would draw their maps as if like a painting. You're looking at a landscape. Like I'm on the mountain, and the place I want to go to is in between those two mountains over there. So they would draw the mountains like you're looking at it. So it was almost like a first-person perspective. So it's not as intuitive as you might think. Standardized map making is or cartography is one of those things that's going to take time to evolve. All right. So the world in spatial terms. So spatial has to do with, think about space. Like there's the term space and place. So you can have a space around you. We're in a space right now that the space isn't within a place. The place is Tyler Classical Academy. And space can be measured. And of course, as we discussed earlier, it can be measured through latitude and longitude. And we divide the world up into hemispheres. You have the northern hemisphere on top, the southern on the bottom, the western hemisphere, which we are in, and then the eastern hemisphere is, of course, where you will find Africa, Europe, Russia, China, Australia, places like that. The northern and southern hemispheres are divided by the equator. The eastern and western hemispheres are divided by the prime meridian. Remember, we discussed that last week. Of course, the equator is known for having the most and the equal amount of sunlight throughout most of the year. Its weather patterns are also very predictable. The prime meridian, the 0 degree for that goes through Greenwich, England, because they're the ones who first measured it. All right, so we also have locations. We have absolute location. And if you might remember, I don't remember if we talked about it in this class actually, but whenever we talk about history, we talk about absolute time. And so absolute time would be a given date. There's not a lot of ancient history dates that we're exactly sure on. So we have to use relative date for that usually. Like we know it was in this century or within this decade. Well, it's the same with location. You can have relative location. So like our absolute location here would be like Tyler, Texas, Tyler Classical Academy, whatever our address is, somewhere on southeast loop. See, you got it. Our relative location would be East Texas or America, So it's a lot more broad. It's less detailed. There's less resolution. Whereas absolute location is like that ultra definition. It's really zoomed in. Okay, hold on. Hey, what's up? You can pretend you could own the hemisphere of an egg.
You actually can't because remember I own one. I own a group of this.
So like,
I try to avoid sugar because it helps.
what if I say no to that and do it?
Well, who's got it? Because I own one.
What?
I don't have mine. I didn't pay anybody to own that. I just own it.
Ah, congratulations, sir. You're the king of a hemisphere. The Grand Emperor.
I know.
All right, ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Yay, let's go. All right,
What
so
was relative location?
it's like a general area, no detail. All right, so places and regions. A place, a particular space with physical and human beings. So like we said, this school building is a place and there are items and people, material objects. Regions, areas that share a unifying factor. It could be a physical feature, language, culture, other things. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do this. My first degree in college was actually forestry, so I took a lot of biology and botany classes, zoology classes, and one thing like we would study was maps of different kinds of ecosystems within Texas. And so there are maps of like what kind of mammals live in what part of Texas. So you could have a region where you're going to have a smaller breed of white-tailed deer towards the western and the southern region. And then you come up here and you have a region that has more of like larger breeds of white-tailed deer. Or you could also look at like regions that have to do with different climate types. So you of course would have like desert, and you could have like the Gulf Coast. You could have the Piney Woods region, and of course you can have regions that have to do with language and culture and race and religion. Yes, sir.
Isn't NATO North Atlantic Trade Organization?
Yeah.
They kind of left off the O.
Well, wait, the organization's down there. Wait,
It's not treaty.
oh, it's trade. No, I thought it was treaty.
It's not treaty. No O.
There's no O, you said?
Well, it's NATO. O at the end.
There is an O at the end. It says NATO, NATO. I deployed under NATO forces. Like, I thought it was treaty organization. We're going to Google it right now. Just to double
Hold
check.
on, guys.
Because the North Atlantic Treaty was made like during like the tail end of World War II. Yeah, it's treaty
It was kind of cool.
What's the O then?
organization.
Treaty or?
That's organization. It's correct. Yeah, because like U.S. forces in Europe fall under NATO, but it's kind of funny because it's always the head general is always an American general. So there was like didn't really seem to matter. All right, so so like different kinds of regions, and so like these regions can be malleable because we know things like climate changes. We know that human groups migrate. And culture, demographics can change as well. Whereas physical features can be a little bit more solid and last throughout times. Again, such as climate, that can be very long lasting, but it can change. Also, things that have to do with, like, say, water, like marshlands and things like that. Sometimes they can change, but that's usually due to human activity. All right, formal region, an area united by a specific factor. And so that's usually like political lines, right? So like you might notice that there's a lot of states that have very solid edges for their borders. And that's because those US states have arbitrary borders that were made with no physical feature like separating them. It's just agreed upon border. Functional regions, a central place and the surrounding areas are linked to it by a highway system. So that's a strange one. I guess what we're talking about here is a functional area is a place that actually, instead of having an agreed upon use, you come to use those areas because, like you might say that like a functional region might be something like a city. So like a lot of people might not live in a city, but the functional region of the city is where people go to work. And then when their job's over, they go back to like the suburbs or wherever else. Though some people, of course, do live in cities. All right, so we have examples of physical regions such as Sahara, taiga, rainforest, Great Plains, and low countries. We'll talk about features of those later, though you should remember those from your world geology course in 6th grade.
I didn't take that.
You didn't take 6th grade science?
Not geology.
Yeah, 6th grade science is supposed to be geology. It's supposed to be physical science / geology.
Wait, you mean about like the
Like rocks
The
and
rocks?
stuff, yeah.
the sediment?
And remember, and then like in 7th grade, it's supposed to be life science, which is like baby biography, you know.
No,
I did just like random things through 6th grade and 7th grade I did biology.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here in Texas, it's kind of random, but it's supposed to have a theme, right? So
And then
like,
in 8th grade I did biology again. I'm doing biology again in 9th grade.
I like biology. It's my favorite science. I actually got it.
In
I mean-
7th grade, we cut open a chicken.
Which chicken? Did you eat it?
No,
No.
I cut open a frog in 8th grade and
Uh,
7th grade.
When I was in middle school, we dissected a lot of things. Like, we had like sheep's eyes, we had like shark, we had like when I went to college, our professor mostly just had us like in zoology work on like nematodes, like little roundworms and stuff. And I was always paranoid because I was afraid I'd get their eggs on me, and then I'd get like tapeworms and stuff like that. I hate parasites. Like they
I'm
bother me.
pretty sure that would happen.
Probably
We cut
for a
open
good
a
reason.
And I remember we would have like wild crawdaddies, crayfish, and we'd split them open, and they would almost explode usually because they have so many like worms in it. And I was like, oh gosh! And so I never ate crayfish again. Ever. Crawfish, crayfish, crawdaddies. I
What?
can't eat them because the wild because I'm paranoid they might have come from the wild and just be full of like worms.
Crawfish is so
But,
good.
but that's like what makes crawfish crawfish. They're authentic like that.
They're authentic because of the worms.
Pretty much.
Ah, gosh. All right. So, cultural region languages, Latin America, you have the Francophone world. And so, like, you'll find that a lot of Africa, they speak French or French dialects. And also in the Caribbean, because they were a major imperial power. And the French style of imperialism and colonialism was to eradicate the old culture and teach people how to be little good Frenchmen.
Having croissants.
Yes, they would pave the streets with croissants. So we have ethnic. So like if you go to certain cities, you can see like a lot of places might have Chinatown and places like that. And that's a normal factor in human in cities. You'll find that groups of different ethnic origins tend to live together. It's because often people tend to want to be around people that remind them of themselves. Religion, of course, people, it's usually the same with religion. You have regions with Islam, regions with Buddhism, and that's, of course, most countries have mixes of some variable or another. Economic. So this is something you might see here in America. You have like the wheat belt, right? So that's like going up towards the Great Plains region of America, north of us. You might also have the European Union. So the European Union is kind of like a strange thing because it's like, it started out as kind of like a trade partnership, but then over time, it kind of became more and more unified in many ways. As far as like regulation and legal structure and stuff like that. So political. I remember I lived in Italy whenever they switched from the lira to the euro, and that was kind of confusing because you had like they gave like a grace period for like a year. You could trade your lira in for your for euros. But I wound up keeping a lot of my lira because now it's like out of circulation money. Political, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So NATO is kind of like, NATO has a lot to do with like shared defenses, shared agreed upon rules as far as how countries are supposed to conduct warfare and peace. But also they have a lot to do with like regulating each other. Like there's reasons why the US military's firearms use certain calibers. It's because we have agreement with NATO organizations that our ammunition is interchangeable. And same with our fuel, and even right down to like repair parts, like screws and stuff like that, and their measurements. African Union, I'm not familiar with that. I'm absolutely not familiar. I don't even know what that is.
It's basically just it's official, but it's not really.
Yeah, because like I'm thinking, and I'm like, I don't know. I remember when Gaddafi went down to Africa and he wanted to be king of
I
Africa.
don't think so.
He was trying to,
Go down Africa. I mean,
but he went down to like sub-Saharan Africa, and they thought it was like funny, and he was trying to actually bribe countries to agree that he was the king, and they were like, "Ah." So I don't know. It's very strange. Money, yeah. Oh yeah, he was crazy rich. Crazy rich. What's a shame though is once all those dictators were removed from a lot of the Middle East and North Africa, it really got chaotic. So I don't know. It's one of those things that brings up the question: are all cultures receptive to the same kind of government?
no,
I don't think so.
American democracy does do that. Cause chaos.
It
Destroy countries.
might within certain regions. See, like that's the thing. I remember one of my favorite political theorists was a guy named von Kuhn Hodliden, and he came up. He made a big proposition that religion is tied to what kind of political system is really important for you, right? And so he made a really big case that Europeans, even to this day, probably lean towards monarchy, even though it's anachronistic. It's like ancient. And so you could probably look at cultures within some parts of the world where they're more revolved around having a very strong singular leader. And I think that you can make the case that some places like that. The problem is it can be very inhumane at times and distasteful.
Not
But-
very culture, just the United States who decides to invade them.
Well, is it the whole United States doing it?
Yeah.
It is.
And other countries can do it.
I mean, no, what I'm saying is it the entire United States doing it, or is it a certain part of the United States doing it?
We mean the United States is invading the country. It's not like only half of the United States is invading the country.
Yeah, but not the entire United States participates in those actions.
Well, I mean, the entire population of the U.S. doesn't travel over to Libya to fight now. But
No, it doesn't. And so what I'm talking about is individual agency and liberty. And so, yeah, people do things, but that doesn't mean everybody's voice is for that thing. So if you throw everybody into the bag for things that they might have, say, voted or campaigned against, then you're kind of like condemning an entire people. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So
I am.
you are. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. But and often people do that a lot. I really do that a lot. It's a shame because you put people all into one basket. Because I know I've had friends from different parts of different countries, and they really challenge a lot of stereotypes. Because of that challenge, I've learned not to throw everybody into one basket. That's one thing I remember from my time in Europe and going through other parts of the world, is a lot of people would say that they didn't like our government, but they like us as individuals. And so I think that was a very strong character thing for a lot of people throughout the world. I think so. So I learned from that. Just saying. All right. So physical systems how physical features interact with plant and animal life to create, support, and change ecosystems. Ecosystem, a community of plants and animals that depend upon one another and their surroundings for survival. So, like, this is what I was talking about earlier. So, like, there's different kinds of animals that live in a jungle, different kinds of animals that live in the desert. And of course, definitely when you talk about marine ecosystems, like, the ocean or lakes and rivers and streams, that's very different. Human systems, how people shape the world. And so we all know that people have huge impact on the world around us. And this isn't just a modern thing. I mean, people have dug canals, built up dams, also terraformed in ways to like remove forest in order to plant crops. A major practice here in North America before Europeans came was deforestation through fire. And so often Native Americans, it was a very common practice, would set the woods on fire, and it would do two roles. One is it would make animals run out into the open, so they were easier to trap and hunt. The second thing it did is that the ash and soot over time would fertilize the land around them, so it was easier to plant crops. So it was kind of like a form of slash and burn farming, which is still very common today, like in South America. But a third thing it would do too is if you do controlled fires, like if you burn down a forest before it builds up too much undergrowth, it keeps the fire from getting too big. And so if you let this stuff build up with branches and dead wood and leaves, the fires in some regions can burn so hot with so much fuel, it'll actually prevent reforestation from a long period of time. It can actually kill a lot of the seeds that should have been there and remained after fire. Okay. All right, so environment and society, the interrelationship between people and their physical environment. And so this of course, can have to do with whether environmental protection, such as, you should know there's certain things you don't pour onto the ground, like especially things that have to do with cars, right? Like battery acid or antifreeze, motor oil that seeps into the groundwater. It can also poison the ground there to where plants don't want to get into it, or an animal could drink it and die. So that's like a good visual example about how you can make the environment around you into a pretty nasty place. So use of geography, many uses, government, business, environmental groups, and planning. So I think that's pretty self-evident. All right, we're going to do one more, and then we're going to call it good. All right. Geographer's craft. And so, like I told you, there's all kinds of geographers out there. Physical geography, the study of the Earth's physical features, its looks, climate, water, plants, and animal life. And so this, often it's like a fine line between physical geographer and a geologist when you really get down to it. However, a physical geographer might be a little bit more in tune with biology. And so, whereas a geologist will simply look at minerals and maybe tectonic plate formation of mountains, things like that, a geographer will look at those things too, but also look at and to see what the plant and animal patterns are like as well. Human geography. And so here we see this has a lot in common with anthropology, the study of human groups. But here they also take into account how does the land shape people? There are a lot of cultural similarities that you can find between, say, people who are mountain people that might live in different parts of the world. They tend to be very hardy and independent. And you can find this through mountain people who live in the Himalayas and the Swiss and throughout other parts of the world. So this is something that's pretty common. The study of human activity and their relationship to the cultural physical environments, including political, economic, cultural factors like population density, urban development, economic production, and ethnicity. Meteorology. The study of weather and weather forecasting. I mean, you know that. Like, if you ever had the news on, they got the weather guy up there. That's meteorology. Historical geography, study of places and human activities over time and how geography shaped them. So, I've never heard of a historical geographer. I'm sure they're out there, but that can be important. Like, you'll find, especially when you're studying like really ancient history, and you'll find that they talk about a river, and we're like, there's no river like that in that country. Well, that's when you might need the help of a geographer to help figure out where that river used to be. But then, for reasons, it may have dried up and filled up and have been hidden ever since. And so that's pretty helpful. This could also be helpful for things like, say, societies that have no historical records, but we know they existed. Like in India, you had the Indus River Valley civilization. Underneath the Indus River, there's all these foundations from ruins from cities that existed, but there's no written records of. Or the same could be said for ancient Egypt. The Nile River used to be more narrow. And so now, however, there's been some excavation into the Nile deep underneath the silt, and they found a lot of where there used to be houses and stuff like that, especially for ancient peasantry from thousands of years ago. So geography can cover up a lot of things that have to do with archaeology and history. But all right, kids, that's going to do it for today. See you later.